Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. This week we're putting the Tonearm's needle on synthesist and producer Danalogue, a founding member of The Comet Is Coming and half of Soccer 96. Out now is his debut album, Teleportations. The record imagines grief and upheaval as a science fiction voyage and was sparked by a chance encounter with the artist Moebius that grew into an imagined civilization. We talk about recording alone with no one else's voice in the room, why he calls his editing process a distilled vodka, and why he still believes imagination is the first step toward hope. Before we get into it, we're only here because of your support, whether that means listening, sharing the show, or giving financially through the Support Us link at thetonearm.com. However you do it, thank you. And now here's Danalogue. I wanted to start by asking you about a recent experience or a couple of recent experiences of yours. I'm sure over the years you've had the different experiences of playing sort of big festival type environments as well as clubs and everything in between. I wanted to ask you about taking your music and specifically this music, this sort of emotionally narrative music. What's the difference between a place like the Brighton Festival and then your sort of own album release show in a smaller place with your own crowd? Do you experience it differently? Do you present it differently? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I definitely thought about it a lot coming into the album launch show. I think with festivals, I've done them for many years, obviously, with Comet Is Coming and Soccer 96. And I have an idea in my head about what kind of show I want to bring for the crowd, and dependent on what time you're playing as well. I think I became very accustomed to playing between like 10, 11, midnight, putting on a very propulsive show and something that feels like that nighttime energy. And I love, in general, playing a very high energy show. But obviously the album also leans into a bit more kind of calmer, more, I don't know, like more ambient sounds here and there. So I think for the album launch, I definitely wanted to bring out some of those tracks. And it felt vulnerable. It's kind of feels chunky and muscular when you've got a kick drum coming through, and it feels like you're protected by this wall of kind of sub energy and people are dancing. So it's a very visual cue as to I'm enjoying what you're doing. Whereas perhaps if you're playing a more gentle thing, someone might be really enjoying it, but like kind of dreaming away and drifting away in their mind. So it's less obvious if people are having a great time. So that's an interesting adjustment.
Oh, yeah.
But having spoke to people after, I mean, it had mixed reviews. I think it was my manager just loved the really propulsive stuff and the really energetic stuff and wasn't so into the ambient stuff. But some of my friends really enjoyed the kind of gradual climax where you kind of very slowly build the dynamic and the speed and the intensity up as the show progressed. So I think, yeah, you have the benefit basically of that home crowd and that album launch crowd of them kind of being behind you all the way, supporting maybe your more winding pathway, across the set.
So much of how I think about your body of work to date or leading up to this project has really been about, either group environments or collaborating or producing, sharing in or being part of other artists and their contributions, in some cases helping them realize their vision. What do you take from those experiences that you can apply here when it's all you?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that actually, but it's definitely a hugely different experience. I think I'm quite intuitive, kind of natural kind of person. So in the moment on all the records I've made, it's just felt very effortless and easy going in the relationship with different artists I work with. And I've been blessed to work with some great ones as well. So you can kind of really trust them and what they're going to bring. And you can trust yourself. I think one of the things that's been very different working solo, you don't have any like affirmative voices around you. So I think it can be one of the greatest things about collaborating is everyone kind of gassing each other up, as we say in England. Maybe I don't know if you say that in the States, but you're kind of supporting each other verbally, wow, that was a great riff, or yeah, we should definitely do this. This new section is sick. But when you're on your own, it's almost like you learn how to be that affirmative voice for yourself, which I think is quite a therapeutic process. It's like, oh, I have to learn to be my own like positive kind of cheerleader I think my role, especially with me and Betamax when we're producing, I think I'm more keep going on this a little bit longer, keep tweaking it. I think it can be better, which doesn't come from a negative place. It's more like a kind of, discerning kind of like, I really want to get the maximum amount of juice out of this as I can. So I think Betamax is a kind of like, yeah, no, this is awesome. I'm down from like the early demo. This is good to go. And so I feel like we've kind of become left brain, right brain a little bit, having made so many records together. I think that was an interesting part of it. And I think I just have a method of making albums, and I did that in collaborations, and I thought that method would be great. The working solo too. So there's things that have carried through and things that have just had to change naturally.
It's interesting that you went to method, because I was thinking about that as well, as like, how does process change, right? Like I have this sort of mental image of an artist walking into the studio in the context of a group recording or producing someone, and there's like a certain energy, and there's bodies in the room, and it's a thing. And then the other scenario is like you're somewhat solitary, and to your point earlier, there's nobody saying, "Oh, good morning, it's great to see you, man. We're gonna kick it today. Like, how was your night? Oh, that sounds great." You have to self-start. You have to it strikes me as very different modes of operating. So it's interesting to hear you say like even methodology can come across.
Yeah, I mean, no, I totally feel what you're saying there. And it's also, I find if I'm meeting someone at the studio, you better bloody turn up on time as well. Whereas if you're working on your own, you can be a bit late, There is something about the responsibility to, show up for yourself, And I think that, again, as much as it's like a musical process, I think it's also a therapeutic process. It's like learning that, you are enough and you can look after yourself, and it's worthy to do. But yeah, process for me is ever since about 2007, I came up with this thing of, loads of people have done it. I didn't invent it, but I just realized what was best for me writing was, rather than sitting down with a pen and paper and kind of thinking, there's an A chord and I think we should go to a mid-late here. I just much prefer just playing long form for many hours until I got into kind of more like a hypnotic trance, and maybe just reached for things a bit more intuitively and maybe took risks here and there. I was like, try this or try that. And sometimes the best bits of music would come after like quite a few hours, actually. And then once you'd really kind of stop thinking too much, But with that method, you end up with reams and reams of recording, almost like I imagine like when people make films and they make loads of takes, and they make loads and loads of footage, and eventually an editor has to get involved and distill it down and try and find a narrative, both between the tracks and then as an album as a whole. It is quite a long-winded process, but it's almost like you do a lot of the composition on the back end rather than writing a piece of music and then you record it in the studio and it's kind of done. So you do almost do the recording first and the writing second. But that for some reason just really felt a little bit rebellious and a little bit exciting, because if you come up with something good, it's so exciting. Thinking we walked into the studio today and we didn't know we were going to get this. And it also came out of recording a lot of demos onto a phone for now, and then being like, damn it, that was a really great performance, but it's on a phone. We can't really put it out. I was just thinking, if you set up the studio like it's a professional recording date and you jam like when we're recording in rehearsals onto our phone, then when you hit play, and you're recording to tape even, and you hit play and you're like, well, it sounds like a record. And then it's just going to need a bit of sorting out and a bit of maybe some overdubs. And I think, that works great for Comet. It works great for Soccer. And then I basically did the same as Danalogue solo. I just recorded lots and lots and lots and lots and kept going. And then did a lot of post-production basically to kind of knit it all into place, bring the room together.
When you record in such quantity like that, I assume you're playing both, you know, you use the analogy to a filmmaker who shoots a lot of takes. I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that you also have to play the role of the editor. And I'm curious how you go back and find the good bits. Are you leaving markers along the way? Or are you like, now I have to go back and listen to 7 hours worth of stuff to find the 15 minutes I liked?
Yeah, the second one.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, but it's great. It's great. I think the key is to leave it for a few months. So I remember reading a Charles Bukowski thing where he said he used to write stuff and then put it in a drawer for 6 months and lock it and then come back. And then when he reads it,
Oh, wow.
it's a different, it almost reads as if it's somebody else. So you can have a bit of a kind of third person's perspective. But it's quite good to leave it for a few months on a hard drive or something, somewhere safe, and then switch it back on. And then sometimes you've forgotten half of the stuff. And you're like, whoa, I forgot about that bit. That bit's really cool. And then I just go really fast. I think that part of it is about, then I put markers in and I slice everything up and color code it and write notes, very simple sparing notes on each one. Very quickly make some decisions, make a very rough mix of everything and make a bounce. So now you've got like a kind of a 6-disc album of like the long list. And then you can like listen to that maybe on the tube or on trains and on when you're traveling around and try and listen to it like a record. And you very quickly work out which bits you like the most. And then once you make a short list of those, then the real fun starts. Then you're going to really start slicing into those because those tracks might be 20 minutes, 30 minutes long. So there'll be another editing process. So it's like kind of this multi-stage kind of cooking down distillation process, like triple distilled vodka or something, but for music.
I would think that gap in time also allows some of the heat of the moment to wear off. So you might find something that you thought was wonderful or you thought wasn't working, and you can take some of that emotion out of it and just come back to it a bit more objectively.
Totally. And then sometimes there might even be a little slice of something that was great that you move past very, very quickly. And then you might want to take that and like loop that. You're like, oh, actually, that bit was great. Let's make that into like a tape loop and then make that the foundation for a whole other track. It might just go off in a different direction. And it might be something that you really thought was going to be the best track and you work on it and you work on it and then you realize that has to be left on the cutting room floor. Yeah, it's a lot of great things have to be destroyed.
I like that line.
Yeah, you have to destroy a lot of lovely things. And some things don't make the record, you know. But not to say, I mean, there's a couple of tracks. I mean, there's one track on the record that was the last one I made. It's a track called Arrival at Ro Ofuyuki. And that I just made in about a couple of hours. And I just felt like it was something missing from the record that I really wanted to do. And I think that's the last track I did. And that happened in the last kind of couple of months before I finished it. So most of it's done in that method, like a track like Moebius Triptych. That was a classic method, but some of them I just did in one sitting as well. So yeah, I try not to have too many rules when you're making stuff.
Of course. I'm always fascinated about the use of narrative in instrumental music. Given what you've told me about how you work, at what point in this project did you have the concept for this arc or this journey that the record was going to take? Hearing you speak, it wouldn't be clear to me how those two things reconcile or how they emerged or came together. Could you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. For this one, actually, I had quite a vision of the sound world right at the beginning, but the overarching narrative of the order of the tracks and some of the kind of astral projection things through it, that came kind of more near the end. But sometimes your process of making the record reveals itself at the end. So you've made loads of stuff and then you can sit back and look at it and go, oh, that's what I was trying to say. Because it's so abstract. If it's instrumental, there's no kind of clear storytelling lyrics, then yeah, it is quite abstract. So then when you stand back and look at it, you suddenly realize what you've made in a way. But there was also a really fundamental building block to it. It was when I first started the record, it was probably about 10 years ago in a studio in Paris that someone, it's a kind of amazing story really, but I bumped into a guy on a train in France and had a coffee with him and he invited me. He'd been promoting Comet Is Coming in France and he bumped into me on this train. We had a little espresso And he said, why don't you come to my synth studio? I've got 21 synths. It's called 21 Filters. And it's down on a little spiral staircase in a basement. And it's basically like his office, I think. But it's got a bed and a shower and 21 synths. He's like, come and stay for a week. I'll give you an incredible deal, which he did. And yeah, and on that week, I had recorded a lot of stuff that I didn't like for 3 days. And I was kind of like, damn it, this was meant to be the week of making an album. And I just felt like I was making a lot of stuff that didn't feel really that good, or it didn't feel fresh, or it felt like I was it was hard to say why it wasn't going great, but I went on a walk to kind of freshen up, and I went past this French comic book shop. They're really good with their kind of cool comics, the French. And for the first time ever, I saw this book by Moebius, this guy called Jean Giraud, or Moebius, and he's incredible sci-fi kind of fantasy illustrator. And he's famous for helping with the art design on some big movies. I think like Alien, the first one there, and things like Tron, and just all those kind of classic 80s sci-fi. Like he had his hand in the background and he was working on those. But he has these incredible books, and this cover, it was in this comic book store, and it was this cover of this kind of scene on this alien planet. And I was absolutely like blown away by it. And I was like, this album has to be almost like the soundtrack to like another civilization on another world. And I kind of tried to take a picture of it, but as I took a picture of it through the glass, my phone ran out of battery, which was quite poetic somehow.
It really is.
And I spent a while trying to find it by just writing in keywords on the internet, and I did eventually find it. And so yeah, this guy Moebius. And then as soon as I had that, then I went back to the studio, and it kind of freed me from a kind of earthly kind of grounding. And then so the narrative started kind of, the seed of it was there, where I just realized I wanted to embrace that part of my character. I wanted to embrace that part of myself that wants to do kind of bit of kind of world building outside of the current reality, and just really embrace that side. I did not be afraid of that, go like lean into it even more. So yeah, that's the kind of, the embryonic part of it.
Are you a science fiction writer who just happens to play music?
That's a good question. Maybe I need to write a book. Yeah. I did write a little thing, which is on the back cover of in the sleeve of the record for Earth Remembrance Day, which is the last track. And yeah, I certainly love the intention of a lot of science fiction.
Do you have a preference or even a conception of how that bit of narrative that you wrote interacts with the music for the listener? Like, if you could control it, would you say, listen to the music, then read the piece, then listen to the music, do them both together? That's how I want it experienced. Like, do you even go that far, or is it just like, it's out in the world, whatever happens, happens?
Yeah, I'd probably say the latter. I mean, I have heard from a few people that they find the piece of writing I did to be quite depressing. I didn't mean it that way. But, if you haven't read it, it's basically a story whereby a future kind of organism that's like a little bit connected to Earth, they're like 25% carbon-based life form, and we're kind of going far into the future, millions of years into the future. They kind of, every now and then, every Kepler cycle, they come back to Earth through this kind of astral projection kind of meditation, and just to look at it. But the Earth is now long gone. It's just a burning red husk. And they come to visit Earth in order to remember what not to do, if you're the custodians of a planet that's got access to this beautiful universal web of consciousness. And I think a few people have been like, oh, I listened to this song and it sounded really uplifting and optimistic and hopeful. And then they're like, hopefully we won't need this for Remembrance Day, and we'll do better here on the planet. And I'm like, well, kind of that is the point. Yeah, that is the hope. But yeah, that's kind of a story just for that track, really. But I mean, it kind of feels like there could be a short story for each track, perhaps.
Yeah, hearing you articulate whether it's the encounter with Moebius or what you just described there, and some of the language you've used around the narrative on the record, it feels very reminiscent to me of like the mid-century science fiction realm that inspired a lot of even artists in the 60s. And there, it was a very specific, maybe post-war view of speculative fiction, just imagining possible worlds, definitely ecological overtones or nuclear age overtones. I feel we're in that realm now. Some parapsychological elements.
Yeah. Time definitely has a funny way of working in cycles, where the time, I guess, the period you're talking about, I guess you'd have the Cold War, right? With the kind of constant fear of a kind of nuclear apocalypse. And I feel like now we're in a time of great global upheaval and military intervention and kind of politics of fear a lot of the time. I think what science fiction, I've said this a few times, but like, people often think of the Star Trek or lots of lights blinking away and robots and kind of R2D2 and Darth Vader and all of that stuff, which is really entertaining and great. But I think oftentimes within the veneer of the kind of entertainment side of science fiction and how marvelous it all kind of is and the fun imagination of it, there's always a kind of deeper undertone, which is like, to imagine a human kind of collective that has managed to mobilize themselves and collaborate, normally cross-race, normally in sci-fi, like Uhura in Star Trek. She had the first interracial kiss in the 60s on television. And outside of that, then you get interspecies cooperation, say, between different kind of aliens and humans who are all kind of working together, perhaps on some galactic ship. And just even that idea that you could coordinate and collaborate and work together on such a huge project, it would require a lot of improvement to how we're doing stuff now. It would require us not to waste energy on killing each other. It would probably require great technological advancement and you can kind of imagine what that would mean to kind of how we look after our own planet and look after ourselves. And I think, to have that kind of hopeful imagination, just as a kind of thought experiment, I think is kind of beautiful, to keep open like what possibilities we might have as a human race down the line, without it being some, it's always some guy, some billionaire trying to go and mine like Mars or the moon or something like that. But I think there's got to be a more interesting way of looking at exploration.
You're touching on something I wanted to ask you about, and it had to do with the idea of losing the capacity to imagine is basically losing hope. I feel like that's really what you're talking about here and it even translates into a lot of like aphorisms or sometimes like self-help language that borrows from the mystical world of like, if you can see it, you can be it. If you can imagine it, you can do it. Like, it's this idea of maybe not dismissing what's possible before you explore what's possible. And I'm curious to hear how you articulate that relationship between imagination and hope and the role creativity plays in building futures, possible futures.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've kind of taken it from slightly less of the kind of self-help aphorism, although I totally get the connection, and more as a kind of like manifestation, almost that kind of thing, which I'm down with, if you can imagine. But I mean, it's more comes from a perspective of if you accept the world as it is, and that's your whole reality, then you can never change anything. So it kind of almost comes more from a revolutionary perspective, and also from one where it's always the people who are imaginative who can start to change things in society. And I think it probably comes from some awful stuff that happens in our country. Like, I mean, in England, right, a few years ago, the government decided it was okay to pump sewage into all of the water. So you guys might not know this.
I think we invented it.
Thanks, guys. Well, it took imagination to think of that as well. But yeah, the imagination is we can make loads more money if we don't put up any red tape, and you can just pump. So now all around the British Isles, which used to have, not immaculate, but pretty nice little swimming spots, now they're all on kind of red alert and filled with, awful stuff like pollution and basically toilet stuff. It's just meant that a kind of generation of children, can't go on lovely little swims in the river or the sea. So what I'm kind of talking about is if you just kind of accept that and be like, a lot of people, you just be like, well, that's just the way it is. Can't change that. It's just the government. It kind of, I think what it comes from is just being pissed off that if you just accept everything that's given to you, say in the news or whatever the narrative is, if you just accept that, then life will probably just get incrementally worse, I imagine. Whereas if you can imagine a better way of doing things, or in the sewage example, just remember how it was literally 20 years ago when they had a system set in place and be like, can we go back to that, please?
Yeah.
But, I think imagination of a better future is like the first step to action. I'd also combine it with just a feeling that maybe I imagine less than when I was a kid. I think it's something that happens naturally as you get older. When you're a kid, I used to imagine like tons of stuff all the time and little stories and characters. And I think by practicing imagining new worlds, I just find it's really like refreshing and invigorating, and gives me a kind of youthful playfulness that maybe I felt I was like maybe losing as I like crossed the threshold of 40. And I was just like, yeah, I just love using music almost as a tool to like kind of create these kind of imaginary worlds in my mind. It's kind of a bit like that, really.
It's fascinating you go there, because it's something that, just being a music nerd and talking to friends about music and stuff, there's always this wonder about the classic rock generation and how, they're old and they're still out there, and whether it's Dylan or McCartney or Mick Jagger or whatever. Doesn't it seem obvious that there's a connection between living the creative life and the longevity? Like, yes, it doesn't hurt to have wealth where you could have the best care money can buy, but there's still genetics at play. Like, not everybody can outrun the Reaper for that long. And it's fascinating to me that those people are like, I feel like we should be studying the connection between their creativity, their life of creativity, and their longevity. Because to me, it seems pretty obvious. Why doesn't Dylan stop? Because when he stops, he dies. Like, duh.
Yeah.
I don't know. So to me, it resonates with the point you're making of like, of course you're tapping in like this harnessing of wonder that the life and the arts and creativity allows, that childlike connection. It's health in a real profound way.
Totally. It probably, like, playing on stage probably helps these guys too. I think it's like the adrenaline and the kind of, and it's something to be said about, being lucky enough to do what you love to do for a living. I just think, the end of imagination is the end of hope itself. Because if you can't imagine something better, then you're stuck with what you got. And I think that's a daily process, even if that means, looking around my studio and being like, my God, I can imagine this being a bit tidier.
I'm going through that right now, actually, in my living space. I'm like, I really don't feel like cleaning.
You have to imagine first, Lawrence, and then you can hope.
Imagine how nice it will be when everything's in its place. Yeah. Another topic that I love to talk with creative people about is the use and the usefulness of self-imposed constraint and limitation. That seems to me to manifest with you with your synth setup. That limitation seems to be important. And yet, in the context of this music and this record, nothing feels small. I'm struggling to actually articulate the question I want to ask, except to say or to ask if you could talk a little bit about how the self-imposed limitations of a two-synth setup results in such an expansive final work.
Yeah. Well, on this album, I did end up using a few more synths, especially at that one in Paris where you had, 21 odd synths. But I've spent the majority of my career playing the SH9 mono synth and the Juno. And it's just, you know what? I mean, both those synths can make a hell of a lot of sounds. And I think that's what first drew me to synthesis right at the beginning, when I realized that rather than a Casio keyboard where you press the flute sound or the piano sound or the organ sound, on these analog synths, you could tweak all of these faders and dials, and you can kind of create your own sounds. And then, dependent on the circuitry of that particular unit, there's a sound palette, and it varies from synth to synth. But I particularly fell in love with the sound of this Roland Juno 60 and the SH9. So say on a track 2, Mother of Mars, that track, that's all sounds made on the Juno. But there's a lot of different sounds on there. It's all sounds made from one synth. And within one synth, you can do so many different things with the enveloping and the filtering. And I don't want to get too nerdy, but, you can even make drum sounds on the synths if you want. Yeah, there's a limitation to just using a couple of synths. I did augment on that for this record. So there's a bit of drum machines in there, and there is some SH101, there's some Jupiter. There's a few different things going on, but I certainly don't have an endless archive. The thing is with working on computers is that, I mean, down the years, Lawrence, quite a few people have tried to convince me I should move to computer software, especially when they see me carrying my heavy equipment on tour and getting on planes with all these huge boxes, because they say, well, you've got every synth ever made on your computer. If you want to use that, you can just download them, and you'll not just have the Juno 60, you'll also have, all these other synths. You have Oberheims and Moogs and all this stuff. But yeah, the self-imposed limitation of only owning a couple just means that I don't start going into choice paralysis. I think I really struggle with that. I'd be like, oh, is this sound going to be better? Is this sound going to be better? But because I've got my synths, I'm now just focused on how I get to know that one synth. It's almost like getting married to one person rather than having hundreds of girlfriends or something. I just getting to know, and you get deeper and deeper, don't you, in love with your partners. And it's like, I still work out new sounds on my synth. I still, after 20 years, I still go, oh my God, I've never done that before. And it's incredible. And then I'll write 5 tunes using that setting.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's what I mean by the limitation. Yeah, I mean, it stops you thinking of endless options in terms of the sound, and maybe starts me thinking of other things. So on this record, I was really thinking about emotion and trying to translate what I was feeling and what I was going through into chords and then into structures. And yeah, I mean, I could play, maybe pianos and organs as well, but I don't. Not yet. I might do a piano album down the line. But yeah, definitely having this limitation. Yeah, it feels like it's a nice sound world that's kind of mine as well. It's like, it feels like this is my sonic identity that you could draw a line through all the way back through Comet Is Coming, all the way back through Soccer 96, back through Flock, back through different records I've done down the years. And that's kind of quite satisfying, really, that I can go back and listen to something from 2012 or something and be like, oh yeah, that's the same keyboard I play today, but I was playing it in a completely different way at the time,
I don't think I fully appreciated when you were speaking earlier that the Paris material actually survived through finished form on this record. That's amazing. So you really have been carrying this around for a while.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's been a few different studios I've worked in. I think there's 5 tracks left on the record. And, I could have released a record just of that Paris session. But to be honest, I'm really glad I didn't. By the time I finish this album, there's definitely some tracks now that I listen back to from that session that I'm glad I haven't put them out. So it's kind of become like a best of I've been doing. Because I was touring a lot and when we weren't touring with Comet Is Coming, I was producing records and mixing records. I did like 3 records with Snapped Ankles, who are like a kind of psych rock, kind of cosmish kind of electronic band. And I did a couple more soccer records. And then when we weren't on tour with Comet, we were then making the Comet records was huge post-production deal for me. It was like 4 or 5 months per record. So I had myself a little bit on the back burner, but I also feel like now is the perfect time because I was always about to go on tour or about to take on a production job. So what I did after Comet Is Coming finished for a bit, I just kind of shut the door and I just said, no more jobs. And I refused a couple of records, which is kind of crazy to do when you're self-employed. So I actually started meaningful work on this record about 2 years ago. But I had, as you say, all of this material from down the years to pull from. So it's kind of like a best of bits of Paris. There's bits recorded in London. There's bits recorded in Margate down on the south coast of England. Yeah, it's kind of all just come together really in the last year or so.
You mentioned some of the other gigs you've turned down or some of the other opportunities you turned down so you could focus on your own music. What's the experience for you of knowing when you're working on something like for a game or for somebody else's project, if that's not too inelegant of a way to say it, when you have a very discrete role, provide music for XYZ, is that, you're like happy you're a working musician, it's work for hire, or like, how do you bring your artistry to that when it's not necessarily your overall work, your vision? Maybe you don't even control how the music gets used in the end. How does that impact you?
Well, with a computer game, I mean, I was just thrilled because I played computer games a lot when I was a kid. It's been a bit of an inspiration, right? Computer game music in general, I think, when I was a kid. And it was a game in space based on an old Japanese game called Cosmic Smash. And I was like, if anyone's going to do the soundtrack to something called Cosmic Smash in virtual reality with like planets and stars all around, and they specifically wanted, me to make music in the way that I make it. They were just saying, do your thing, basically. I thought it was just a fantastic opportunity. And I loved the guy who was making the game. He was a real creative, vivid kind of thinker. So I thought, well, this is going to be really fun. And then working on other people's albums, it's like, when I worked with Alabaster de Plume, for instance, when he first moved to London, came into the Total Refreshment Centre, and we spent a couple of years hanging out after hours, and I'd finish in the studio at about 2 a.m, and so would he, and we'd meet up, have a couple of beers and chat about art and politics and stuff. And then he said, yeah, do you want to co-produce my next album? I loved that because it was almost like trying to get inside the soul of someone's music and trying to amplify it to the maximum capacity. So being a producer is kind of just making loads of decisions. And if I can make the right decisions that help them to kind of elevate their music to the next level, and if they've asked me, they usually want me to kind of make the kind of decisions I make for my own music too, and maybe add synths the way I would to my own music. In as much as you're kind of facilitating them to kind of really realize their vision, you're also being invited to bring yourself to the party kind of thing, to bring your vibe. So it's a lovely dance between trying to breathe out the soul of their sound whilst also, bringing your vibe to the party. I think I made a mistake early on when I got asked to produce stuff. I didn't bring myself enough, I didn't play enough synths and stuff on other people's stuff. So I've been enjoying, as I've got a bit more confident with my sound, is to try and, if someone's asked you, they often really want you to do your thing.
Yeah, they ask you for you.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's a really interesting balance. But yeah, I absolutely love it. And with Alabaster, we even did some of the stuff that I do where we record like long open jams and then cut them together. And I think he hadn't done that at the time. So it was kind of like, oh, wow, this is cool. And I working with Snapped Ankles, it was great to bring my mix skills in and, really use effects really creatively and try and put them in a kind of meta space. So yeah, I'd never done a fully solo album, and I think that felt like an elephant in my room, so to speak. I thought, it's about time. I've got to see what I can do just completely on my own.
When we were first speaking and we were talking about the live performance, you used the word vulnerability. One of the tracks I wanted to ask you about was Far Beyond the Sun. How rooted in reality is that song for you?
And it's completely not rooted in reality, I don't think.
Wow.
But it depends on reality. I mean, I just think there's so many different realities going on all the time, and we're only normally accessing the one that makes kind of survival sense, the one that evolution has made sure our brain is locked into quite a lot of the time for survival. And there's so many different dimensions, I think, going on all the time around us, but it's just not very useful for us to see because it wouldn't help us eat or sleep or be safe or make provisions for the future. So I think that track came out of an imagination of like the afterlife, really, and how the afterlife is kind of gatekept by monotheistic religion quite a lot. So they tell us what it's going to be. It's going to be heaven and hell. It's going to be St. Peter at the pearly gates. Or a reaction to that atheists would be like, well, there's nothing. It's just dark. It's just black. It's just boring. And I was just kind of playing with the idea about what I would do. And again, it's not even anything like that new. I mean, I think loads of cultures have had this, but I just thought about I thought about the physical space out there, outer space, with all the stars and planets, being a huge physical manifestation of all the souls, that have left Earth, and flying. Just kind of fly through space, far beyond the sun, go far beyond that, like through to as many galaxies as you want, and you naturally gravitate to like resonant souls and treasured kind of souls that you'd met here on Earth.
Yeah.
And it's a way of helping with the grieving process, because we all lose people, don't we, in our lives, and it is tremendously sad. And I just think it's just fun to think about, meeting them again.
It's beautiful.
Or even meeting people that this gets into more realms of fantasy, but I started to do this meditation practice with a connection to a kind of benevolent alien in the Sirius system. And it's kind of like a cool kind of game. I don't know if you've read The Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson.
I was just about to ask you, have you read much Robert Anton Wilson? He's one of my thought heroes and and as a young man really helped me learn how to think about the world. The idea of maybe is very big in my life. Maybe.
Yeah.
I try not to make assumptions or have assertions. So Cosmic Trigger is important to me. Yeah.
Cosmic Trigger. Yeah. Chapel Perilous. But it's kind of like, if you live as if something is true for a month, see how your life changes, whether that means Buddhism or Catholicism or becoming a Jedi or whatever. And so I was doing this kind of specific meditation practice where I was in connection to a benevolent being. And so the lyrics of that song is, I'll look far beyond the sun and I'll see you there. And I just think it would be cool to meet that person. But I don't know, it is reality, but it is not at the same time.
Yeah. Not yet, maybe.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you just opened up a door that we could spend another hour on, and maybe we'll get to at some point. I really appreciate your time, and it's been lovely talking with you, and I really have enjoyed listening to the record. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lawrence. Yeah, thanks a lot for your questions, your warmth, and it's been great. Your curiosity is very, very nice to engage with, man.
Thank you, Danalogue, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, I know you'll like at least one more of the over 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson, with editing and sound design by Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Birdie, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. The single best way you can support us is by sharing us with at least one friend, and I hope you'll do that right now. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find features on Arthur Russell collaborator Stephen Hall of Narasta Steel, Toronto noise composer Nolan Hildebrand, Shayna Falana and her cult worth joining, The Goddess Party, emerging avant-pop artist Mixall, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.